New York City in the year 2022. Nothing runs anymore. Nothing works. But the people are the same. And the people will do anything to get what they need.
This is the police.
What they need most is Soylent Green.
The supply of Soylent Green has been exhausted. Return to your home.
What is the secret of Soylent Green?
You a movie fan, Tom? You ever see that movie, The Time Machine?
No. It's the land of the future, right? There's only two kinds of people in the world now. The Morlocks and the Eloi.
Okay.
The Elois, they live above ground. They wear togas. They're all blonde. They eat grapes. But it's like the Garden of Eden there. I mean,
Basically, everybody just lays around, listens to harp music. And the Morlocks,
they live underground, right? Big, hairy, ugly suckers like you wouldn't wish on an ape, right? They're down there with all this machinery.
they're making sure that the Elois have enough food and togas. So this is a
Great deal if you're an Eloi, right? There's only one thing.
The Morlocks, they don't eat grapes. They're cannibals. They eat Elois.
And behold, a great image.
This is an historic moment. We have in this past year made great progress in ending the long era of conflict and Cold War. we have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order.
President Bush was also responsible for the North American Free Trade Agreement.
President Bush picked an appropriately symbolic setting today to sign the North American Free Trade Agreement between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. He was at the headquarters of the Organization of American States in Washington. The agreement will create a free trade zone throughout North America. The agreement was also signed in Mexico City by President Salinas and in Ottawa by the Canadian Prime Minister Brian Mulroney.
Good luck to all of you now in the future.
This is a major choice for our country of historic proportions. Sometimes we do something right.
In a few moments, I will sign the North American Free Trade Act into law. NAFTA will tear down trade barriers between our three nations. It will create the world's largest trade zone. I believe we have made a decision now that will permit us to create an economic order in the world. We're now making real progress toward a worldwide trade agreement so significant that it could make the material gains of NAFTA for our country look small by comparison. Today we have the chance to do what our parents did before us. We have the opportunity to remake the world.
We gathered to celebrate a great victory, a moment when our country has chosen to take the lead in shaping a new world of expanded trade and expanded opportunity.
For the first time, a truly global economy is possible because they've made it possible for a company located anywhere to use resources located anywhere, that is people, building, material capital, to produce products anywhere and sell it anywhere and be located anywhere. It makes available to current technological knowledge, to capital, human and physical, located in the advanced countries. It makes available a range of low-cost labor that wasn't before available. That's what happened. That's the way in which Hong Kong, Taiwan, Korea, the tigers of China, of East Asia, have been able to develop. So it's had very different consequences in different parts of the world in that respect.
Now, you mentioned different parts of the world, and indeed, people in Canada and the U.S. are starting to get awfully lonely now when they keep hearing about these fabulous growth rates in Asia. And you know, if the textbook says that eventually prosperity should spread itself around the globe, they're thinking, well, when is it going to happen to us? When is it coming to North America? Because we're not doing so well.
No, and that's because we're not letting it. Because we're doing our best to frustrate the forces that are trying to help us.
What could we do?
Open our boundaries. Cut down on tariffs. We don't need, I favor NAFTA because it was a little step in the right direction, but it doesn't go nearly far enough. We don't need walls against goods coming from abroad. What we need is rather to let down our barriers, to open them up, and to take advantage of the opportunities for cooperation around the world.
If you're paying $12, $13, $14 an hour for factory workers, and you can move your factory south of the border, pay $1 an hour for labor, hire a young 25, that's assuming you've been in business for a long time, you've got a mature workforce. Pay $1 an hour for your labor, have no health care, that's the most expensive single element making a car, have no environmental controls, no pollution controls, and no retirement, and you don't care about anything but making money, there will be a giant sucking sound going south. I am putting my country's interest far ahead of my business interest.
You would do better with NAFTA?
When I'm in a room with corporate America, the first thing they say is, Perot, why don't you keep your mouth shut? You could, with your resources, make more money than anybody else. Here is the NAFTA game. Buy U.S. manufacturing companies cheap right after NAFTA passes that are labor intensive, that make good products, that have marginal profits. Close the factories in the U.S., move the factories to Mexico, take advantage of the cheap labor, run your profits through the roof, sell the company stock at a profit, go get another one. Everything I'm doing makes it next to impossible for my family to ever do anything south of the border, and I could care less, okay?
You do no business in Mexico?
I have no, look, I will put my country's interest in front of making money.
Let me know.
And I don't ever want to make money at the expense of other people. Conceptually, I am for free trade. I am, if we ever get back to the subject, for a good agreement with Mexico. I am deeply concerned about the 85 million people who live in poverty and don't have any rights. I am deeply concerned about workers who, when they go on strike, U.S. companies call in goons, bring in the state police, shoot several workers, kill one, injure dozens, put the workers back to work, and cut wages 45%. Those are things that are wrong. We can do this right. I am not in favor of a one political party country. The PRI runs the country. President Salinas will pick his successor. President Salinas went to the 36 families who own over 54% of the gross domestic product and asked them for $25 million apiece. Fortunately, for their families, one of them leaked it to the New York Times and they didn't have to pay. That's Mexico. He will pick his successor, not the Mexican people. Read the State Department's annual report on human rights of journalists being killed, people in the opposing political parties being put in prison and killed and tortured.
But, you know, for most Mexicans, this is sort of a standard operational procedure. Their elections have been fraudulent for years now. That's why they threw out the PRI in 2000. They had a mass movement in the streets for democracy, for real democracy as opposed to fraudulent democracy. And that movement was succeeding when they elected a president in 1988 whose election was taken away by Salinas. And Salinas came into power at that point, consolidated all the alliances with the narco gangs, consolidated the alliances with the U.S. economic interests and oil interests in Mexico.
The Mexican elite, which has done so well with this neoliberal economics and free trade, and some of the richest billionaires in the world that have emerged in Mexico.
This is not a free society, and yet for some reason the same people who are willing to put our troops at risk around the world to make sure people are protected, once we get to Mexico, ignore all of it.
Are you saying that this supports a fascist kind of state?
I'm saying this is not, I'm concerned any agreement we do should give the Mexican people a decent life, and over a period of time should give them some purchasing power. If I'm going to do business with somebody, let's just say, if the U.S. is going to do business with another country, let's do business with a country whose people can buy things.
Let me respond to this. Because some of what he's saying here is true. Mexico is not yet a full democracy. They do not yet have full protection for human rights. They do not yet have the kind of living standard and labor standards and environmental protection standards that we would like them to see. But they've been making tremendous progress, and the progress has been associated with this new relationship to the United States. The decisions in Mexico will ultimately be made by the people in Mexico. The question is whether or not we will have the ability to influence what they and their government decide. The best way to eliminate our influence down there is to defeat NAFTA. The best way to preserve it is to enter into this bargain, continue the lowering of the barriers.
Big government, they're preaching their protection creed. They pander big business and all of their greed. Globalization, their free trade plan to put the whole world in a few strong hands. Since cheating has grown to be such a fashion, I believe in my soul it'll ruin the whole nation. Fought and we died for the land of the free. Now the home of the brave is all ate up with greed. Republicrats and Democrats, that ain't no surprise. got their hands full of gimme, they got their mouths full of lies. Left wing or right wing got this to say, that they're just two wings of the same bird of prey. It's hard times in the country, yes, it's hard times I cry. If the times they don't kill me, I live till I die.
Incidentally, NAFTA is expected to have the same effect in Mexico. And the effect will be to increase, intensify the move that is very clear towards separating the society into two tiers. In the long term, it means sort of internationalizing the third world model. That's the typical third world country. Say Mexico, you know, small sector of very wealthy people, usually connected to international investment and finance and transnationals and so on, and a very large sector of extremely poor people.
We've come to a position where we're in a new world order, and I'd like to know what the candidates feel our position is in this new world order and what our responsibilities are as a superpower. Mr. President?
Well, we have come to that position since I became president. 43, 44 countries have gone democratic. No longer totalitarian, no longer living under dictatorship or communist rule. This is exciting. New World Order to me means freedom and democracy. I think we will have a continuing responsibility as the only remaining superpower to stay involved. If we pull back in some isolation and say we don't have to do our share or more than our share anymore, I believe you're going to just ask for conflagration that we'll get involved in the future.
Our work, as I understand it, is based on a single assumption that the West is never going to be the aggressor. Thus, we do disagreeable things, but we're defensive.
NATO, for example, has kept the peace for many, many years, and I want to see us keep fully staffed in NATO, so we'll continue to guarantee the peace in Europe. But the exciting thing is, the fear of nuclear war is down, and you hear all the bad stuff that's happened on my watch. I hope people will recognize that this is something pretty good for mankind. I hope they'll think it's good that democracy and freedom is on the move. And we're going to stay engaged, as long as I'm president, working to improve things. You know, it's so easy now to say, hey, cut out foreign aid, we got a problem at home. I think the United States has to still have the Statue of Liberty as a symbol of caring for others.
My expertise, as you know, is CIA, Marine Corps, 3 CIA secret wars. I had a position in the National Security Council in 1975 as the chief of the Angola task force running the secret war in Angola. It was the 3rd CIA secret war I was part of. The National Security law creating the National Security Council and the CIA, as you know, was passed in 1947. The CIA was given this charter to perform such other duties and function as might be necessary to the national security interests, and given a vague authority to protect its sources and methods. And I think it was in the mid-'80s that I coined this phrase, the Third World War, because in my research I realized that we were not attacking the Soviet Union and the CIA's activities. We were attacking people in the Third World. And I'm going to just quickly, in the interest of time, just give you a little sense of what that means, this Third World War. Basically, it's the third I believe, in terms of loss of life and human destruction, the third bloodiest war in all of history. They undertake to run operations in every corner of the globe. They also undertook the license of operating just totally above and beyond U.S. laws. They had a license, if you will, to kill, but also they took that to a license to smuggle drugs, a license to do all kinds of things to other people in other societies in violation of international law, our law, and every principle of nations working together for a healthier and more peaceful world.
Our policies are peaceful, but our methods can't afford to be less ruthless than those of the opposition. Can they? No, I'd say, since the war, our methods, our techniques, that is, and those of the communists have become very much the same. Yes. I mean, occasionally, we have to do wicked things. Very wicked things indeed. But you can't be less wicked than your enemies simply because your government's policy is benevolent, can you?
We also have to work, though, sort of the dark side, if you will. We're going to spend time in the shadows and in the intelligence world. A lot of what needs to be done here will have to be done quietly, without any discussion, using sources and methods that are available to our intelligence agencies, if we're going to be successful. So it's going to be vital for us to use any means at our disposal, basically, to achieve our objective.
We have to live without sympathy, don't we?
It is a mean, nasty, dangerous, dirty business out there, and we have to operate in that arena. I'm convinced we can do it. We can do it successfully, but we need to make certain that we have not tied the hands, if you will, of our intelligence communities in terms of accomplishing their mission.
Meanwhile, again, they battled to convert the U.S. legal system in such a way that it would give them control of our society. Now, we have massive documentation of what they call the secret wars of the CIA. We don't have to guess or speculate. We had the Church Committee investigate them in 1975, gave us our first really in-depth, powerful look inside this structure.
President Ford has reportedly warned associates that if current investigations go too far, they could uncover several assassinations of foreign officials in which the CIA was involved.
We didn't realize how this pent-up passion in the Congress, feeling that they ought to have been more entitled to a role in shaping national policy toward the Vietnam War, together with journalists who were competing to be on the air every night with something ever more sensational, would so work together to create just this unstoppable tide of disregard for the national interest.
Being in a world of concealment and deception puts a person in a different space psychologically, morally, and socially. Being an intelligence officer, you're in an adversarial contest, in a way something like a war. And if it's morally justifiable to take people's lives in war, it seems that it may be morally justifiable to mislead them in conflict situations. Deception is really necessary for the protection of people who work in the agency, the people whom they're dealing with, and the national security. Deception in this situation is unavoidable. Ignatius had a vision of his people going anywhere in the world for the good of souls, as he put it.
I am against assassination. I think it's counterproductive, and I've issued directives against it.
By the time I got there in 1969, it felt much more like an assassination program.
Current investigations could uncover several assassinations of which the CIA was involved.
Yes, there were abuses. There was no doubt about it. They really got out of hand.
This is a matter of such gravity. It goes right to the roots of our morality as a nation.
After 5 months of closed-door investigation, of talking in private with intelligence agents and officials, most of the senators now agree with Chairman Frank Church that the CIA has indeed been a rogue elephant out of control.
The relationship between the CIA and the Army Biological Laboratory at Fort Detrick as an activity requiring further investigation surfaced in late April of this year. It resulted from information provided by a CIA officer not directly associated with the project. Information provided by him and by two other officers aware of the project indicated that the project at Fort Detrick involved the development of bacteriological warfare agents, some lethal, and associated delivery systems suitable for clandestine use.
If that amount of shellfish toxin were administered orally, that quantity was sufficient to kill at least 14,000 people. If it were administered with the sophisticated equipment that was found in the laboratory, that quantity would be sufficient to kill a great many more. Estimates vary upwards into the hundreds of thousands. My first question is, why did the agency prepare a shellfish toxin for which there is no practical antidote, which attacks the nervous system and brings on death very quickly? Why did the agency prepare toxins of this character in quantities sufficient to kill many thousands of people? What was the need for that in the first place?
I cannot explain why that quantity was developed, except that this was a collaboration that we were engaged in with the United States Army, and we did develop this particular weapon, you might say, as a possible, for possible use.
Purely defensive uses were not what the agency was limited to in any way. There were definite offensive uses. In fact, there were dart guns. You mentioned suicides. Well, I don't think a suicide is usually accomplished with a dart, particularly a gun that can place the dart in a human target in such a way that he doesn't even know that he's been hit.
There's no question about it. It was also for offensive reasons. No question.
Have you brought with you some of those devices which would have enabled the CIA to use this poison for?
We have indeed.
For killing people? Does this pistol fire the dart?
Yes, it does, Mr. Chairman. The round thing at the top is obviously the sight. The rest of it is what is practically a normal 45, although it's special. However, it works by electricity. There's a battery in the handle, and it fires a small dart.
So that when it fires silently?
Almost silently, yes. Very little.
What range does it have?
About 100 yards, 100 meters.
About 100 meters range.
Right.
And the dart itself, when it strikes the target, does the target know that he's been hit and about to die?
That depends, Mr. Chairman, on the particular dart used. There are different kinds of these flechettes that were used in various weapon systems, and a special one was developed which potentially would be able to enter the target without perception.
Without perception?
Right.
And did you find such darts in the library, in the laboratory?
We did.
Did this come as a personal disappointment to you that you are being requested to resign?
Oh, no. As I said, I've anticipated a change, and if that's better for their business, well, that's fine.
Mr. 𝐊𝐫𝐤, looking back at it now, do you wish maybe you'd taken a firmer stand with some of the committees in Congress and perhaps not given them quite as much information as you have? Would you do it differently?
I don't think so. I think the best way was to get rid of the past and transition into a future.
I consider myself fortunate indeed to have been confirmed for this challenging job. I want this job. I want to do it well, and I'm proud to be a part of the CIA. Thank you very much.
My wife and I went to the swearing in of George Bush Sr. as director of CIA, who replaced your father. Your father had left along with couple of other people that Ford wanted to get rid of.
I remember talking to President Ford about why George Bush Sr. to replace your dad as CIA director. Ford said, I wanted a loyalist. He didn't consider your father a loyalist. I asked about who was loyal. George Bush, he said, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Kissinger, and Greenspan.
William Colby has been missing since April 27th. His canoe was found washed up on the banks of the 𝐊𝐴 River, April 28th.
Senator Church said in the 14 years before he did his investigation that he found they had run 900 major operations and 3,000 minor operations. And if you extrapolate that over the whole period of the 40-odd years that we've had a CIA, you come up with 3,000 major operations and over 10,000 minor operations. Every one of them illegal, every one of them disruptive of the lives and societies of other peoples, and many of them bloody and gory beyond comprehension almost. Extensively, we manipulated and organized the overthrow of functioning constitutional democracies in other countries. We organized secret armies and directed them to fight in just about every continent in the world. We encouraged ethnic minorities to rise up and fight, people like the Mosquito Indians in Nicaragua, the Kurds in the Middle East, the Monks in Southeast Asia. We have organized, and we still do, and fund death squads in countries around the world, like the Treasury Police in El Salvador, which are responsible for most of the killing of the 50,000 people just in the 80s, and there was 70,000 before that. Trying to summarize this third world war that the CIA, the U.S. national security complex with the military all interwoven in it in many different ways, has been waging. Let me just put it this way. The best heads that I coordinate with studying this thing, we count at least minimum figure 6 million people who've been killed in this long 40-year war that we've waged against the people of the third world. These are not Soviets. We have not been parachuting teams into the Soviet Union to kill and hurt and maim people, especially not since 1954 when they developed actually a capability of dropping atomic weapons on the United States. They aren't British, French, Swedes, Swiss, Belgians. We don't do bloody, gory operations in the countries of Europe. These are all people of the third world. They're people of countries like the Congo, Vietnam, Cambodia, Indonesia, Nicaragua, where conspicuously they nor their governments do not have the capability of doing any physical hurt to the United States. They don't have ICBMs, they don't have armies or navies. They could not hurt us if they wanted to. There has rarely been any evidence that they really wanted to, and that in fact is perhaps the whole point. If they had had ICBMs, we probably wouldn't have done the things to them for fear of retaliation. Cheap shots, if you will, killing people of other countries of the world who cannot defend themselves under the guise of secrecy and under the rubric of national security.
Despite Reagan's denials, investigations soon revealed that arms had been traded for hostages held in the Mideast.
A few months ago, I told the American people I did not trade arms for hostages. My heart and my best intentions still tell me that's true, but the facts and the evidence tell me it is not.
Only days later, it was further revealed that the arms to Iran had been severely marked up. Some of the profits had been illegally diverted to support the Contras, a guerrilla force organized by the CIA fighting the Nicaraguan government.
To think of the democratic governments that have been overthrown in the last 30 years by military coups is almost like giving a capsule history of CIA covert operations in the last 30 years. I mean, there was the overthrow of Prime Minister Mossadegh in Iran in 1953. There was the overthrow of Arbenz in Guatemala in 1954. There was the overthrow of the Brazilian government in 1964. There was the overthrow of the Ghana government in 1966. A lot of the governments I just mentioned got into trouble with the international oil companies because they tried to assert their national prerogatives over their own resources. Time after time, the CIA has come in on behalf of those multinational companies.
Anytime you walk the streets in Salvador, you can't tell what kind of eyes you meet. 'Cause when night comes, they'll hunt you down. They'll take your life and leave you to be found. No one can protect your life in Salvador. Judges that condemn you have no names. Could it be the gentleman that lives next door? Or the guy who goes with you to work?
They were organized and trained by the CIA.
That squad man can walk and sing the way you do.
Not an indigenous force inside Nicaragua that had any support from any of the population in Nicaragua. It was a total artifice that was created by these men.
Men who kill have heroes that play soccer too, and argue with their kids about the world.
The tactics used by the Contras were tactics of terrorizing civilians.
They'll hunt you down and then go home to sleep next to their gun. No one can protect your life in Salvador. Judges that condemn you have no names. Could it be the gentleman that lives next door? Or the guy who goes
In the late afternoon of December 4th, 1980, an unmarked grave was found in a field in El Salvador.
in a country where all faces look the same? Fears the poker game that runs the town. When your best friend disappears, who's to be blamed? Think they know in Rome what's going on. Think the Pope knows that when night comes, they hunt us down and take our
The school teaches commando operations, sniper training, how to fire an M16, and psychological warfare.
Wolfmen come out to show the moon, our heads covered with blood. Nothing can protect your life in Salvador. Judges that condemn you have no names. Could it be the gentleman that lives next door? Or the guy who goes with you to work? You don't know, I don't know. Nothing can protect your life in Salvador.
They moved away to see the women kneeling down on the ground to pray. They killed all of them. Not a single one of them survived. Just me by the grace of God. I hid under a tree. When I heard the screams of the children, and I knew which ones were mine, they were crying, "Mommy, they're killing us."
Over 900 men, women, and children were massacred. Virtually the entire population of the village and the area surrounding El Mozote. Out of 143 bodies identified in the laboratory, 131 were of children under the age of 12, including 3 infants under the age of 3 months. 10 of the 12 officers cited as responsible for the 𝐊𝐧𝐸 massacre were graduates of the School of the Americas.
They are, in fact, giving the Contras written instructions in violence and destabilization. The target is the people. The social and economic infrastructure is what you're hitting at. The purpose is to disseminate terror, traumatize the people. We're not killing Sandinistas in the capital. We're not blowing up their homes and terrorizing them. We're hitting at the people throughout the interior of the country.
Well, one thing they don't need is more defense, what they call defense money. You know, they call this military defense, but it has nothing to do with defense. This is offense. We're all over the place, and they're not going to quit.
I am sending Congress a budget that rebuilds the military, eliminates the defense sequester, and calls for one of the largest increases in national defense spending in American history. National Defense Authorization Act is the most significant investment in our military and our warfighters in modern history.
No, we don't need it. The lobbyists in Washington control this. It's the neocon lobbyists who want a world empire. It's the military-industrial complex that makes a lot of money. There are certain governments around the world that are totally dependent on us, you know, financially through our foreign aid programs and us promising protection. See, we operate with two options for the people around the world. We go to them and we say, look, you do what we tell you, and we're going to take care of you. We're going to give you foreign aid, and we will protect you from all outsiders. And people say, well, we like our independence. And if they go along with what we say, we do take care of them, and they have a financial benefit at the expense of our people here at home. Now, if they say, no way, we don't want you here, and we're not even going to use your dollar anymore, you know what happens then? Then we get rid of them. So I think they always need more money. This whole idea that there's a token effort at all to cut the military spending, you know, it's met with great resistance. It's not really defense money, though.
101 in leadership is to be accountable for what you do. Let's go back in terms of accepting responsibility for your actions. If you create Saddam Hussein over a 10-year period using billions of dollars of U.S. taxpayer money, step up to the plate and say, it was a mistake. If you create Noriega using taxpayer money, step up to the plate and say it was a mistake. If you can't get your act together to pick him up one day when the Panamanian major has kidnapped him, and the Special Forces team is 400 yards away and it's a stroll across the park to get him, and if you can't get your act together, at least pick up the Panamanian major who they then killed, step up to the plate and admit it was a mistake. That's leadership, folks. Now, leaders will always make mistakes. We've created, and I'm not aiming at any one person here, I'm aiming at our government. Nobody takes responsibility for anything. We got to change that.
I'm taking responsibility for saying your time's up.
I'm watching the light.
All right.
Do you think the Iran-Contra scandal will have an effect on future government operations?
No, I think it would be more the same.
I don't think that it's going to have much of an effect at all. I just think that they'll be more careful next time.
They will continue to carry on covert operations. I think this has been going on forever.
They make laws which are for us that they don't seem to be able to, they don't apply them to themselves very often.
And who is going to inhibit them? The gangsters that are running this country is going to inhibit somebody.
So the New World Order to me means freedom and democracy. Keep engaged. Do not pull back into isolation. And we are the United States, and we have a responsibility to lead and to guarantee the security.
We've got a commitment that they're going to raise their minimum wage with productivity. We've got an agreement for the first time in history to use trade sanctions to compel the enforcement of their environmental standards. As they begin to develop and locate better jobs farther south, we cut down on illegal immigration.
Do you guys ever do anything but propaganda?
Isn't it your business also?
Would you even know the truth if you saw it?
Oh yes.
I don't believe you would. You've been up here too long.
Everybody makes a mistake once in a while, but I just can't be personally responsible
That's one of the weaknesses of a partnership, isn't it, Sid?
Well, maybe you better incorporate the store.
Incorporate?
Yes. Incorporating would give you the big advantage of what you want right now. Limited liability. You start with a group of people who want to invest their money in a company. Then these people apply for a charter as a corporation. This government issues a charter to that corporation. Now that corporation operates legally as an individual person. It is not a group of people. It is under the law a legal person.
Imperial Steel Incorporated has many of the legal rights of a person. It can buy and sell property. It can borrow money. It can sue in court and be sued. It carries on a business. Imperial Steel, along with thousands of other legal persons, is a part of our daily living. It is a member of our society.
Having acquired the legal rights and protections of a person, the question arises, what kind of person is the corporation?
Corporations were given the rights of immortal persons, but then special kinds of persons, persons who have no moral conscience. These are a special kind of persons which are designed by law to be concerned only for their stockholders and not, say, what are sometimes called their stakeholders, like the community or the workforce or whatever.
The great problem of having corporate citizens is that they aren't like the rest of us. As Baron Thurlow in England is supposed to have said, they have no soul to save and they have no body to incarcerate.
Of course they make a profit, and it's a good thing. That's the incentive that makes capitalism work, to give us more of the things that we need. That's the incentive that other economic systems lack.
People accuse us of only paying attention to the economic leg because they think that's what a business person's mindset is. It's just money. And it's not so, because we as business people know that we need to certainly address the environment, but also we need to be seen as constructive members of society. And I always point out there's no organization on this planet that can neglect its economic foundation. Even someone, living under a banyan tree is dependent on support from someone. The economic leg has to be addressed by everyone. It's not just a business issue.
But, unlike someone under a banyan tree, all publicly traded corporations have been structured through a series of legal decisions to have a peculiar and disturbing characteristic. They are required, by law, to place the financial interests of their owners above competing interests. In fact, the corporation is legally bound to put its bottom line ahead of everything else, even the public good.
That's not a law of nature. That's a very specific decision, in fact, a judicial decision. So they're concerned only for the short-term profit of their stockholders, who are very highly concentrated.
People talk to me about, the issue of Republican versus Democrat, as if they don't get it. And I say, look, here's the way you get it. It's organized crime. All you do is you call the Republicans the Genoveses, and you call the Democrats the Gambinos. The people at the top, they treat it like a crap game, like it's their crap game, like they're making lots of money. Occasionally, somebody at the table shoots each other, but the moment anything threatens their crap game, they all unite to protect it. They're both controlled by the same financial, economic, corporate interests.
Once the banks get into the picture and they form a partnership with the government gives them the legal power now to create bank-issued money backed by the coercive power of government to require everybody to accept that bank money.
In the course of the last century, they have converted this nation from a nation of independent freeholders to a nation of employees. And they're just one step away from being serfs.
Now we can see a new world coming into view. A world in which there is the very real prospect of a new world order.
The New World Order will be built, an end run on national sovereignty, eroding it piece by piece, will accomplish much more than the old-fashioned frontal assault. Council on Foreign Relations. We shall have world government, whether or not we like it. The only question is whether world government will be achieved by conquest or consent. Paul Warburg, Council on Foreign Relations and architect of the Federal Reserve System. Dr. Carroll Quigley, professor from Georgetown University, who was also President Clinton's mentor, said in his book, Tragedy and Hope, the powers of financial capitalism had a far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. And then President Clinton's Deputy Secretary of State, Strobe Talbot, said, in the next century, nations as we know it will be obsolete. All states will recognize a single global authority.
People in the audience who care so much about China, it does deny its citizens fundamental rights of free speech and religious expression. It does define its interests in the world, and sometimes in ways that are dramatically at odds from our own. But the question is not whether we approve or disapprove of China's practices. The question is, what's the smartest thing to do to improve these practices? I believe the choice between economic rights and human rights, between economic security and national security, is a false one.
How's Bill Clinton done the first year in foreign policy?
I think about as expected. I actually wrote an article last December about it. My view is that he was exactly the way he presented himself, a candidate of big business, a new Democrat, free from the old liberal cliches about entitlements and rights and so on, committed to improving the business climate, to engaging the government more in supporting the wealthy, the kind of thing he'd done in Arkansas, the November achievements, NAFTA, the APEC, the Asian Pacific Council Summit, associated domestic programs. That reflects his achievement in supporting the concerns and interests of major American corporations. It explains why the Wall Street Journal, for example, is so enthusiastic about him, describing him as continuing with what has been a pattern of Democratic presidents who link up very closely to interests of big business rather than small business, whereas the Republicans, in contrast, tend to be the party of the business community generally, so somewhat different. And I think that's pretty much what we're finding, and we will continue to find, I think, with the health plan and so on. On the other hand, in other foreign policy issues, such as say, helping restore democracy in Haiti and so on. I mean, I never expected any possibility of that and don't see any.
You mentioned NAFTA right off the bat.
Yeah.
Go into that a little further about the impact NAFTA is going to have.
Well, NAFTA, there's a good deal of the issue that was discussed, like will there be more jobs or less jobs? Nobody has any idea. I mean, the economic models that are being used are so remote from reality that what they say is almost meaningless.
And this treaty would increase jobs here?
Oh, no question about it.
Because there was an announcement today that it would be minimal either way.
There have been 23 studies of the impact of NAFTA on jobs in the United States. 22 of them have shown that it will cause an increase in jobs in the United States. The one that didn't showed that there would be a decline in illegal immigration, and they counted all of the illegal immigrants as holding jobs, and when they were taken out of the picture, they said that was a decline. Everybody else says it increases jobs in the United States.
On those points,
okay,
Ross.
Government studies are kind of like weather forecasters before balloons even, and certainly before radar.
How you doing, Mr. President?
How are you?
My name is Eric Cottenham, and I'm representing the Steelworkers Union, Local 1999, and I'm trying to find out what do we have left as far as all of our jobs are leaving Indianapolis, right? And I see here you're doing a lot of things, but in Indianapolis, there's nothing there for us. I mean, what's next? I mean, what can we look forward to in the future as far as jobs, employment, whatever, because all of our jobs is left or in the process of leaving, sir.
Well,
The problems have been, part of the problems have had to do with jobs going overseas. And this is one of the reasons why I've been trying to negotiate trade deals to raise wages and environmental standards in other countries so that they're not undercutting us.
Now we're back down to common sense. Number one, you remember in the tax and budget summit when they said, watch my lips, no new taxes. Then they gave you a big tax increase and they told you if you would pay it, they would balance the budget, pay off the debt, and we'd live happily ever after. See, now then, the new president had to raise taxes again because that one didn't work, and you picked up the difference. Now let's go to Medicare. When Medicare was first conceived in 1965,
are we talking about NAFTA or?
I'm talking about government forecasts.
Well, look, can we talk about
Excuse me, Larry,
NAFTA?
I don't interrupt. May I finish?
But he did. He brought up a specific
Could I finish?
point. Yeah, but of course.
I'm saying all government forecasts. How come the facts are?
Well, I don't want to sit here and listen to you just take shots at President Clinton on other subjects.
Well, excuse me, I haven't taken a shot at it. He wasn't here in 1965.
Well, you know, but you talked about we tried to reverse trickle-down economics, and we're proud that we did.
The tax and budget summit occurred before he became president.
Yeah, you went on from that. Why don't we talk about NAFTA?
Excuse me, all I said was he had to raise taxes again. That's hardly a cheap shot.
Well, on the wealthy,
Okay,
my goodness.
Back to the point.
That's the campaign promise.
Let's try to stay on point. Okay.
Let me give these two examples. We talked about the inability to forecast the debt, right? And the fact that we have to keep paying more taxes. Then when Medicare came along in 1965, they said it would cost us $9 billion in 1990. It cost us $109 billion. Then when Medicaid came along, they said it would cost $1 billion in 1990. It cost $76 billion in 1990.
Meaning that you don't trust any government forecast?
And that means that no matter how we reform health care, we will keep this promise to the American people. If you like your doctor, you will be able to keep your doctor, period.
Congress will push me to raise taxes, and I'll say no. Read my lips. No new taxes.
They basically come out with phony numbers. He's talking about these exports.
You're saying that the forecasts on NAFTA are phony?
Yes.
However, there are some consequences about which there's pretty general agreement, and if you read the text and you see the international forces at work, you can understand why. It is going to have the effect of deepening the split between the wealthy and the general population. Now, inequality has been growing in the country for about 30 years. Real wages have been declining. Growth has been quite slow. Such wealth has been created is going increasingly to a small sector of the wealthy. The country's kind of taking on a sort of a third world look. I mean, it's not Brazil or Mexico, but if you walk through the streets of any major city, say Washington or New York or whatever, you see what the statistics tell you, that there's a large, relatively marginalized population developing, superfluous for wealth production, because increasingly transnational corporations are able to shift production to high repression, low wage areas elsewhere, and wages will go down. In fact, they're going down internationally because these things all interact. So as U.S. wages are now the lowest in the industrial world outside of Britain. That's a big change over the last 10 years, in fact, a complete reversal. And that means that, say, German factories will invest in Alabama, as they're now doing, because they can get much cheaper and more repressed labor, so it brings down German wages. So what is anticipated from NAFTA, I think almost across the board, is a lowering of the income of a substantial part of the population, probably a majority, an increase in wealth for privileged sectors, and the effect will be to increase, intensify the move that is very clear towards separating the society into two tiers.
This is an impressive crowd, the haves and the have-mores. Some people call you the elite. I call you my base.
In the long term, it means sort of internationalizing the third world model. That's the typical third world country. Say Mexico, you know, small sector of very wealthy people, usually connected to international investment and finance and transnationals and so on, and a very large sector of extremely poor people. And incidentally, NAFTA is expected to have the same effect in Mexico. Another effect of NAFTA, which everyone expects, is that cheap U.S. agribusiness exports will contribute to the process already going on of driving out large numbers of peasant producers. All of this swells the workforce. Swelling the workforce drives down income. There is no serious opportunity for organizing. It's pretty repressive and brutal. So that'll have the effect of lowering wages there, just as it'll have the effect of lowering wages here.
I've been accused of looking in the rearview mirror. That's right, I'm looking back at reality. And here is what I see after many years. Mexican workers' life, standard of living and pay has gone down, not up. After many years of having U.S. companies in Mexico, this is the way Mexican workers live all around big new U.S. plants. Here it is on a more personal basis. Livestock in this country and animals have a better life than good, decent, hardworking Mexicans working for major U.S. companies. And here's one just to look at. Here's a good, decent man working his heart out, making his cardboard shack, and the cardboard came from boxes that were used to ship the goods down there.
Can I say something about that?
This, I didn't interrupt you.
Mexican officials defend NAFTA, calling it a benefit to the national economy. But as CGTN's Frank Contreras reports, some Mexican farmers won out.
Dating back more than 100 years to the Mexican Revolution and General Emiliano Zapata, leader of the peasant revolt, small plot farmers in Mexico have fought for their right to make a living working the land. Most small-scale Mexican farmers argue the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, only boosts the gains of U.S. agro-food corporations. The director of a national small-scale farmers association, Victor Suarez, points to corn, saying Mexico first pioneered the grain thousands of years ago. Now, he says, Mexico is the largest buyer of U.S. corn.
The United States government continues to subsidize its corn exports to Mexico far under production costs. That is an unfair disadvantage for Mexican producers, especially the small-scale ones.
During previous rounds of NAFTA renegotiations, the Mexican government has defended the trade pact in public and before the Mexican Congress. Under NAFTA, a few well-financed Mexican agricultural sectors, like the avocado industry, have grown. But for more than 20 years, since NAFTA first came into existence, most Mexican small-scale farmers have opposed the trade pact. But they say it's not for the same reasons as the current U.S. president.
We are not in agreement with Trump. We are against this trade agreement because it does not benefit common people.
Suarez says NAFTA leaves out producers of indigenous crops, like high-protein amaranth.
More than 6 million small-scale farmers have abandoned their fields in search of employment in the cities or in the United States. By abandoning the fields, Mexico has become dependent on the U.S. for its nutrition.
Such nutritional dependence, they say, goes against centuries of Mexican tradition.
So, talk about how American agribusiness dumps food in Mexico.
We calculated what we call the dumping margin, that is, the extent to which U.S. exports are leaving the country and being sold at prices below their actual production costs in the United States. That's one of the definitions of dumping under the World Trade Organization.
And they do that to wipe out local competition? Is that the main objective?
Well, they do that. The U.S. government is doing that, is subsidizing those products in part to provide very cheap products to agribusiness, because it's the raw materials for agribusiness, both in the United States and in Mexico. The exports go because the United States is looking, U.S. companies are looking for market share and looking to expand their market share in Mexico, and NAFTA gave them that opportunity by decreasing protection.
So when you say below the cost of production, it's because of the subsidies?
Because of the subsidies, and it's actually more complicated than that because of a variety of other policies that essentially encourage overproduction of, say, corn. So corn is probably the most important example here because it's such an important product.
So what did this do to Mexico? What did you find?
Well, so what we found was that in the case of corn, corn was going into Mexico at 19% below the cost of production in the 9-year period we looked at, 1997 to 2005. And that cost Mexican corn farmers $6.6 billion over 9 years. That's $700 million a year. And if you figure it out on a per acre basis, just sort of what does that mean to a Mexican farmer? It's more than the value of the basic Mexican subsidy program to those farmers. So it's a devastating loss.
We're in Culiacan, Sinaloa, a place you may have heard of because of the Sinaloa cartel. And this is a shrine of Malverde. He's the patron saint of drug traffickers. But the state of Sinaloa is not only known because of this, it's also the breadbasket of Mexico. And we've come here because we're hearing that there's somehow a modern day slavery going on in the fields of this country. And migrant workers who travel from field to field are being treated very badly, and they're living in very inhuman conditions. So we want to go see and investigate.
This man believes in the cult of Malverde. He moves around the chapel with a huge bag of pot, and he even tried to sell it to us. He says people grow pot and poppy because agriculture pays so badly. It's Mexico's dilemma in a nutshell. Before drug trafficking kicked off here, people grew tomatoes, cucumbers, eggplants, and other vegetables. The state of Sinaloa still feeds most of Mexico, and then exports half of the produce to the US. Once the fruit and vegetables cross the border into the US, they're inspected carefully and tested for pesticides. But while the U.S. Department of Agriculture has jurisdiction to check the produce, it can't inspect the working conditions of those who picked it. Jornaleros, or day laborers, are mostly an uprooted community of migrants, too poor to have land or crops of their own, and constantly traveling from one state to the other, following the harvest and the promise of a daily wage. They're made up of indigenous communities from poor states like Oaxaca or Guerrero, and migrate north to Sinaloa and Baja California. Some cross the border into the United States. The unlucky ones rotate endlessly within the country and become internal migrants. In the US, they make nearly $7 an hour, while in Mexico, it takes them a whole day to make that much.
The typical Mexican automobile worker has a daily wage of $11.60. This will not pay for food and housing for a family of 5. Mexican workers' salaries fell 65% in real terms during the 1980s. How does Mexico treat its workers compared to our country? The typical worker in Mexico lives in a one-room shack with no plumbing or electricity. His counterpart in the United States is a middle-class citizen who can afford to send his children to college, who lives in a nice home. Many Mexican workers with U.S. companies cannot afford a low-income house and must scavenge cardboard and trash to build their homes. Many Mexican workers make 58 cents an hour, the minimum wage. It would take 200 years to buy a low-income home in Mexico with this wage. Well, what about labor laws? In one strike in Mexico in 1990, dozens of workers were shot and injured by the state police. The plant was shut down. 2,000 workers were fired. Those who remained had to take a 45% pay cut. Doesn't sound like the way we treat workers in the United States. At another factory, 14,000 workers were fired. The union was dissolved. The union leaders signed a new contract without consulting the workers. That wouldn't happen here.
American workers are more than 5 times more productive than their counterparts in Mexico because they have better tools, they have better training, they have a better infrastructure. There are lots and lots of companies that moved down to Mexico and decided that they would rather move back to the United States. I've got a whole long list of them. General Motors is one of them, but they have now started moving jobs back from Mexico back to the United States.
I'll respond.
If I have to, first off, the whole textile thing is a joke. Talk to anybody in the textile business and they will tell you if their competitors go to Mexico, they will have to go to Mexico. They will also tell you that the Mexicans have spent a fortune building textile plants and are building them now in Cuba where labor is next to nothing. Next, the GM bringing back jobs into this country is a sham used in the union negotiation. Next, the U.S. worker is 5 times more productive than the Mexican worker. Big joke of the century. The Mexican worker is a good worker. He is an industrious worker. He quickly gets up to 70% as productive, and after 3 to 5 years is 90% as productive and only makes 1/7 as much. You cannot compete with that in the good old USA, particularly with our benefits, retirement, and so on and so forth. It's just that simple.
If you look at the international system, this is a continuing drag. Any country that's providing more, where workers have achieved more rights, say rights to hold job security or pension rights or whatever, it's naturally going to be driven down as international capital can seek the point of highest repression and lowest wages. So you move towards an international economy of essentially low growth, low wages, and very high profits. And that's a kind of internationalization of the third world model, and this particular version of NAFTA is very likely to have that consequence.
First call is from Royal Oak, Michigan. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Yeah, you started talking about NAFTA, and you got me thinking about my first objection to it was just the fact that it was like 2,000 pages, and it's like you don't really understand it, and you think they're trying to fool you with something. And I was wondering, how long did bills used to be, like 100 years ago? And do you think that it would be possible for them ever to just say all future bills should be less than 10 times the length of the U.S. Constitution?
Well, you're quite right about not only the length of this, but if you do have a look at it, you'll find out it's also unreadable. I mean, it's very hard going. And recall that it was intended that this would be rammed through in secret. If you look at what happened, the agreement was signed by the 3 executives of Canada, United States, and Mexico in mid-August 1992. I think it was August 12th or so, 1992. Remember, that was right in the middle of a presidential campaign. Whatever one thinks of attitude towards NAFTA, it's obviously has a big effect on American life. Try to look back and find out what anybody said about it. It was very little discussed. In fact, probably wouldn't have been mentioned at all if Perot hadn't brought it up.
At this point, you're probably wondering, who negotiated this agreement that is not in our country's best interest? Our country went to extraordinary efforts to keep the details of the NAFTA negotiations from the American people. The negotiations were conducted in secret. Members of Congress had to go to a secret room to read the agreement as it was being negotiated. Meanwhile, the Mexican government, the Mexican business community, and the U.S. lobbyists representing Mexico knew all the details and provided day-to-day input to make sure that the agreement was optimized in Mexico's favor. When the negotiations were completed, just before the Republican convention, the American people were given a 43-page public relations handout, not the 2,000-page agreement. When the agreement was initialed in October 1992, just before the presidential election, the American people were given only a summary version. The American people were given no additional information when the agreement was signed in late 1992. The complete agreement, and here it is, was not released to the American people until January 20th, 1993. It's now available to you at a cost of $41 a copy. As you look at it, it looks like Webster's Dictionary, so not too many people have read it. But it will determine the fates of millions of working Americans.
According to U.S. trade law, there's a 1974 congressional legislation which requires that any trade-related instrument, any law or whatever involving trade, must be submitted to the Labor Advisory Committee, a group based in unions, for advice and consultation and analysis. That's the one popular input to trade legislation. It was not given to them. They were, in fact, informed that their reaction to NAFTA was due on, let's say September 15th or whatever the date was, some date around then, and they were actually given the text of this 2,000-page document, unreadable document, 24 hours before the due date. That was to ensure that they couldn't even formally convene. All of this, incidentally, was suppressed in the press. Nobody talked about it. The intention was that all this would go through. Congress was on a fast track. They weren't going to pay any attention to it, and nobody would know. There was enough popular opposition that developed for all sorts of reasons so that it had to become a public issue. But it was not intended to be. It was intended to be driven home in secret and then just sort of sitting there, locking into place particular arrangements and particular achievements of the powerful. And itself is quite anti-democratic in its essential nature. In fact, I think it should, the major impact of these developments, including 𝐓𝐡, may well be to undermine democratic structures and to transfer power to private transnational institutions. And recall that a corporation is essentially free from public control, and when it becomes transnational, even the limited control that comes from national legislation declines. It should not be called a free trade agreement, because it is not. It is a highly protectionist agreement with a complex mixture of liberalization and protection designed to guarantee investor rights. Investor rights are very delicately protected. Worker rights, community rights, and so on are undercut. In fact, one consequence of it is to attack democratic institutions. The same is true of 𝐓𝐡. It places decision-making power in the hands of unaccountable structures which are transnational. If there's a conflict, let's say, between some local or regional decision on, say, environmental protection or pesticides or whatever, and a transnational corporation, that will ultimately find its way to an adjudication panel which operates in secret, which is made up mainly of corporate lawyers and so on, and is out of public control. All of these systems reduce the role and effectiveness of parliamentary institutions and unions and other popular groups, and increase the decision-making power of investors and transnational corporations and big banks and so on, and that's what they're intended to do.
All these supposed free trade agreements, NAFTA, 𝐓𝐡, CAFTA, are truly nothing more than the governments of the world and the central banks working together to create a one-world government. They are not free trade. These treaties are government-managed trade, and they are destroying the American worker. Through these treaties, the bankers are actually beginning to control the laws of the world.
Fire at will, the subject is so-called free trade.
Free trade, and I'm for free trade, although I'm not for the type of system that we have today, because I don't believe it's my concept of free trade. I do not believe that the Congress should ever have the authority to pass this authority to the president, and on things like on fast track, and then the president devise agreements that serve the interests of the special interests. So I'm positively opposed to this transfer of power, just as I am opposed to the Congress transferring power to the president to declare war. So you can be for trade. I follow the admonition of the founders. They think we're a lot better off if we trade with countries rather than fight with them. You know, we fought with Vietnam all through the 60s. It didn't go well. We left. Now we trade with them, and I think we do better trading. But where our problem gets into are these managed trade agreements under the WTO and under NAFTA and the plan for a North American Union. These are the kind of movements I think are very detrimental to our national sovereignty. I don't think it helps our workers. And in combination with our monetary policy, we are now exporting our jobs due to a flawed trade policy and actually a flawed foreign policy, because we have allowed too much power to gravitate to the executive branch, and the Congress won't live up to their responsibilities. The Congress is supposed to be protecting us, protecting and guarding against guarding our liberties. At the same time, here we are once again in an undeclared war overseas. It's going on endlessly. trying to enforce UN resolution, which is very disruptive to our economy. It causes huge deficits, and that is more disruptive to our trade policies as well. So, but I do not believe we can solve all our trade problems unless we eventually look at monetary policy. Because when we have the privilege of printing the reserve currency of the world, we abuse this, we print the money, and no wonder the jobs go overseas because they take our dollars. But that is coming to an end because this war and our financial obligations is nearly bankrupt this country, and I think we're in for big trouble.
Are you a protectionist?
No, not really. Only when it becomes national security reasons. But no, I think the more trade that we can have, the better. But I just don't like privileged trade. I don't like international managed trade. You know, I don't like this NAFTA and WTO managed trade because I don't think the people are served. I think the special interests are served because they have the influence in these organizations.
Would you either rewrite or rescind NAFTA?
I'd get rid of NAFTA and WTO for that matter. I certainly don't want a North American Union, and I'm sick of these plans for this highway coming through here that's going to go from Mexico to Canada. That's not my idea of national sovereignty.
Gordon Thompson has taken the time to look at the facts, and he supports NAFTA. Let me tell you who else has taken the time. Every living former president of the United States in both parties, the two-termers and the one-termers. Every former Secretary of State, every former Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Treasury, every living Nobel Prize winner in economics, conservatives, liberals, everyone in between, they've never agreed on anything. And distinguished Americans from Colin Powell to Tip O'Neill to Rush Limbaugh.
Just remember this. If you want to trade, you trade with people who make money. You don't trade with people who oppress their workers and they don't have any money. A good deal will sell itself, folks, just plain talk. 4 former presidents came out for it and couldn't sell it. All the secretaries of state came out for it and couldn't sell it. We had satellite going across 200 auditoriums across the country. That didn't sell it. Got 𝐊𝐴 for it. That didn't sell it. $30 million coming out of Mexico, and that is rotten, and that is wrong, and that didn't sell it. $35 million coming out of corporate America to try to get out of this country, go south of the border, and hire that cheap labor, and that didn't sell it.
Let me know.
This dog just didn't hunt. Now, today they don't have the votes in the House of Representatives. We're in the 3rd quarter. They can get them because they're buying them big time with your tax money. We're working the halls night and day to make sure it doesn't happen. You can play a key role in it. But sure, they all tried to sell it to you, and the fact that they couldn't demonstrates that this deal is not good for our country.
Let me get a break and then let's do it. But it doesn't impress you that every former president supports
it? It impresses me that they couldn't do it.
Oh, but well, it doesn't impress you that they support it.
That they show, those are the guys that cut the worst trade deals in history. He's already talked about it.
It's not over.
Wait just a minute now. They did the Japanese deals. They did the Chinese deals. God bless them. They cost you 2 million jobs. 2 million jobs.
You think they fooled Colin Powell?
He's a great soldier, doesn't know anything about business.
Secretary of State Colin Powell will make the case for war in a speech to the United Nations.
One of the most worrisome things that emerges from the thick intelligence file we have on Iraq's biological weapons is the existence of mobile production facilities used to make biological agents. Let me take you inside that intelligence file and share with you what we know from eyewitness accounts. We have first-hand descriptions of biological weapons factories on wheels and on rails. The trucks and train cars are easily moved and are designed to evade detection by inspectors. Confirmation came later, in the year 2000. The source was an eyewitness. We also have satellite photos that indicate that banned materials have recently been moved from a number of Iraqi weapons of mass destruction facilities.
Powell will put America's credibility and his own on the line.
There was no way the Secretary of State was going to read off a script about serious matters of intelligence that could lead to war when the script was basically unsourced.
What we're giving you are facts and conclusions based on solid intelligence.
For more than an hour, Secretary Powell displays photos, holds up a chemical vial that suggests anthrax, shows slides, all to make dozens of claims about Saddam's weapons of mass destruction.
I am no expert on centrifuge tubes, but just as an old Army trooper, I can tell you a couple of things.
Every single thing we knew was thrown into that speech. This is all we got, and we're making these firm judgments.
One of the most worrisome things that emerges from the thick intelligence file we have on Iraq's biological weapons is the existence of mobile production facilities used to make biological agents.
He makes a dramatic accusation. Saddam has bioweapons labs mounted on trucks that would be almost impossible to find.
We have first-hand descriptions.
In fact, Secretary Powell was not told that one of the sources he was given as a source of this information had indeed been flagged by the Defense Intelligence Agency as a liar fabricator.
To find even one of these 18...
Powell was also not told that the prime source, an Iraqi defector codenamed Curveball, had never been debriefed by the CIA.
Maybe the name of the agent wasn't alarming enough. Maybe it should have been Screw Up or, a lying sack of manure, something like that. But, to know that you're giving the president a ticket to go to war based upon one source, at that point, you want to drag the source in and talk to him yourself.
The day before Powell's speech, a CIA skeptic had warned about the defector's reputation as a liar. In an email reply, his superior acknowledges the problem, but adds, "This war is going to happen regardless. The powers that be probably aren't terribly interested in whether Curveball knows what he's talking about."
The United States will not and cannot. Leaving Saddam Hussein in possession of weapons of mass destruction for a few more months or years is not an option. Not in a post-September 11th world.
We did not find stocks of either chemical or biological weapons. Active nuclear weapons program, no. We found no evidence, nor do we judge that there was one.
Do you think they fooled Colin Powell? I think they fooled Colin Powell.
Here's what the president, former president, says. Colin's presentation was exhaustive, eloquent, and persuasive. Coming against the backdrop of Saddam's defiance of the weapons inspectors, it had a profound impact on the public debate. Later, many of the assertions in Colin's speech would prove inaccurate, but at the time, his words reflected the considered judgment of intelligence agencies at home and around the world.
A few months ago, I told the American people I did not trade arms for hostages. My heart and my best intentions still tell me that's true, but the facts and the evidence tell me it is not.
2 days later, the Maddox and the Turner Joy 2 destroyers reported they were attacked.
Where are these torpedoes coming from? Well, we don't know. Presumably from these unidentified craft.
There were sonar soundings, torpedoes had been detected, other indications of attack from patrol boats. We spent about 10 hours that day trying to find out what in the hell had happened. At one point, the commander of the ship said, "We're not certain of the attack." Another point, they said, "Yes, we're absolutely positive." And then finally, late in the day, Admiral Sharp said, "Yes, we're certain it happened." So I reported this to Johnson, and as a result, there were bombing attacks on targets in North Vietnam. Johnson said, "We may have to escalate. I'm not going to do it without congressional authority." And he put forward a resolution, the language of which gave complete authority to the president to take the nation to war. The Tonkin Gulf Resolution.
This war is going to happen regardless.
It does appear now that a lot of these torpedo attacks were from the sonar man, you see. And they get keyed up to a thing like this. Everything they hear on the sonar is a torpedo.
You're pretty sure there was a torpedo attack then?
Oh, no doubt about that, I think. No doubt about that.
No, it was just confusion. And events afterwards showed that our judgment that we'd been attacked that day was wrong. It didn't happen. Our judgment that we'd been attacked that day was wrong.
My heart and my best intentions still tell me that's true. But the facts and the evidence tell me it is not.
Later, many of the assertions in Collin's speech would prove inaccurate. Do you wish you'd been less exhaustive, eloquent, and persuasive?
No, that was my job at the time, and the information that I was being given by the intelligence community hung together. And I spent 4 days and nights out at the CIA going over it and asking every way I could, are you sure of this? You have multiple sources on this. And I got those assurances. There's the same assurances that the intelligence community gave to the president, the same assurances the intelligence community gave to the Congress 4 months earlier.
We know this works. If it doesn't work, you know, we give 6 months notice and we're out of it.
My question is this, Mr. Perot. If you obviously have many, many criticisms about the NAFTA agreement, can you give us specific answers as to an alternative to it? If you don't like it, tell us what really we should be doing.
Can you overview a treaty you would sign?
Yes. In 1904, Theodore Roosevelt wrote a beautiful, simple statement. And basically, he said something very similar to what Congressman 𝐓𝐡𝐢𝐫 recently said. He said, under no circumstances can we lower the standard of living of the working American. Therefore, any trade agreement we enter into must require a social tariff, I would say, that makes it an even playing field, then gives Mexico an incentive to raise the standard of living of its people, which it does not have now. First, you've got to have a clear understanding of Mexico that we can only do business with a country that gives its people a decent standard of living and respects human rights. Because we are all humans, every human life is precious.
That would be the first part of it.
Every human life is precious. If you don't treat your workers fairly, and if you don't treat your people fairly, history teaches us that that produces stress that will take maybe a century to cure. It's in Mexico's interest to do that. Then their workers will come up the economic scale. We'll put in a social tariff that drops as they bring their workers' pay and benefits up. If we pass NAFTA and we pass health care and your competitor goes to Mexico, you will either have to go to Mexico or go out of business. I can give you a whole list of things like that.
You would have a tariff that's
the way we're set now. No, it's a social tariff. As they bring their people up, we drop the tariff. When it's head-to-head competition, their people have equal pay and benefits to ours.
Wrong with that.
There is no tariff, and we're brains and wits, and off we go. That's good for Mexico, and it protects our people.
Why is that bad?
The idea that we can isolate ourselves from the rest of the world and only do business with perfect countries that do everything the way we want them to do is pretty unrealistic.
The Bush administration then did attack, and the attack was carried out in a manner which is criminal under the laws of war. They attacked infrastructure. I mean, if you attack New York City and you destroy the electrical system, the power system, the sewage systems, and so on, that amounts to biological warfare, and that's the nature of the attack. Then came a sanctions regime, which was mostly Clinton, but began with Bush, which is, by conservative estimates, killed hundreds of thousands of people while strengthening Saddam Hussein.
His proposal, as I understand it, is to raise tariffs and call it a social tariff and use that to keep products out from any country that doesn't meet our standards in all things.
Mexico.
Now, let me finish, please. Now, you take that kind of approach to Mexico and you defeat NAFTA, you've lost the partnership we've been building with Mexico for a generation and more. But beyond that, here's the central point. We have to realize that we unilaterally cannot change the entire world. We can't force every country in the world that we want to trade with to meet our standards in everything that we would like to see them meet. We unilaterally cannot change the entire world.
Today we have the chance to do what our parents did before us. We have the opportunity to remake the world.
And after these things I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues. For her sins have reached unto heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities. Reward her even as she rewarded you, and double unto her double according to her works. And the cup which she hath filled, fill to her double. How much she hath glorified herself and lived deliciously, so much torment and sorrow give her. And the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise any more. The merchandise of gold and silver, and precious stones, and of pearls, and fine linen, and purple, and silk, and scarlet, and all fine wood, and all manner vessels of ivory, and all manner vessels of most precious wood, and of brass, and iron, and marble, and cinnamon, and odors, and ointments, and frankincense, and wine, and oil, and fine flour, and wheat, and beasts, and sheep, and horses, and chariots, and slaves, and souls of men. Go to now, ye rich men, weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you. Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver is cankered, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. Ye have heaped treasure together for the last days. Behold, the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, crieth, and the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. Ye have lived in pleasure on the earth, and been wanton. Ye have nourished your hearts as in a day of slaughter. Ye have condemned and killed the just, and he doth not resist you. And a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone, and cast it into the sea, saying, Thus with violence shall that great city Babylon be thrown down, and shall be found no more at all. And the voice of harpers and musicians, and of pipers and trumpeters, shall be heard no more at all in thee. And no craftsman, of whatsoever craft he be, shall be found any more in thee. And the sound of a millstone shall be heard no more at all in thee. And the light of a candle shall shine no more at all in thee. And the voice of the bridegroom and of the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee. For thy merchants were the great men of the earth, for by thy sorceries were all nations deceived. And in her was found the blood of prophets, and of saints, and of all that were slain upon the earth. Rejoice over her, thou heaven, and ye holy apostles and prophets, for God hath avenged you on her. Thou sawest, till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floor. And the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. The stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Be patient, therefore, brethren, unto the coming of the Lord. Behold, the husbandman waiteth for the precious fruit of the earth, and hath long patience for it until he receive the early and latter rain. Be ye also patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord draweth nigh. Grudge not one against another, brethren, lest ye be condemned. Behold, the judge standeth before the door.
My hope is built